Welcome to the Asset Revolution podcast, where each week your hosts from Arbor Digital provide educational opportunities for financial advisors and individual investors to gain knowledge in this emerging powerhouse that is digital asset investing. The Asset Revolution podcast is your connection to the future of digital assets and an opportunity for anyone to get off zero. Let's dive in. All right, everybody, welcome back to this edition of the Asset Revolution podcast. It's been a rough couple of weeks in the digital asset space. And this episode, I wanted to bring on co-founder, compliance officer of Arbor Digital and principal of Arbor Capital, Marc Kolesky. We all know who he is. But real quick, if this is your first time listening, my name is Marc Nichols. I am the product director of Arbor Digital. And what that really means is I wear a lot of different hats to bring forth the services that we offer within the digital asset space to advisors and investors here in the US. And Matt, for everyone and in the audience, please do a reintroduction of yourself very quickly.
Thanks, Marc. Yeah, my name is Matthew Kolesky. I am president of Arbor Capital Management, who's the kind of the parent company of Arbor Digital, which is a division of Arbor Capital. So I, along with Marc and some other folks, help run Arbor Digital, run the portfolios, and wear a lot of other hats. I'm also the compliance officer for Arbor Capital. So I bring a very unique perspective, which we're going to talk about today, to this asset class, digital assets. So thanks for having me back, Marc.
Of course. This doesn't happen without you or the team. So, and I think today's episode, or not, I think the title of today's episode is the trust episode. So with that in mind, today we are going to talk all about trust and what that means in light of everything that's happened in the digital asset crypto space with FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, and what has been ongoing, and it's still ongoing, and we're not going to see the full effects for many months. So batten up the hatches. We're going for a ride. But I would like to start off, Matt, with this idea of separating who and what FTX was versus other well-intentioned, well-regulated players in the space. So would you mind jumping into that?
Yeah, sure, Marc. So the idea of separating these offshore entities that don't have any oversight really, aside from, I think, the Bahamas and some other limited regulatory bodies, but separating this out. And if you listen to our Mt. Gox episode, right, to me, this is a similar situation. You had these offshore digital asset exchanges being run by people that really had no idea what they were doing and got in way over their heads. Now, FTX certainly, and Sam Bankman-Fried and his team took the Mt. Gox, to the next level in terms of the assets on the platform, as well as what's appearing to be just the lack of oversight. I think some of the stories that are coming out from the gentleman who oversaw the Enron unwinding, it said this is some of the worst lack of controls he'd ever seen. And so this is an institution that had billions of dollars. And so we need to make sure that we're separating those types of entities from the actual entities like Gemini or Coinbase that are inside the borders of the United States, and they are regulated by different entities, right? The NYDFS. And so they have to adhere.
What's the NYDFS?
The New York Department of Financial Services. So which is what Gemini has been working with, honestly, since 2015 or 16, going through the painstaking process of getting a state chartered trust company designation, right? They could have done it offshore. They could have done this the easy ways and spun up billions of dollars within, a couple of months, but they've been going through this the right way, which is part of our due diligence. We'll talk about that, but we want to separate that because it's really important. There's all kinds of exchanges. There's still exchanges that are living out there on the web. They may have their headquarters in Singapore or the Bahamas. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it doesn't give investors and people inside the United States the confidence and to be able to look and see what they're doing from a regulated standpoint.
Thank you for going into that. And one of the biggest misconceptions I'm seeing, especially things that are being put out there in the traditional media about what these entities are, and no one's really made those distinctions yet. And that's why we wanted to start it off with that, because this all comes back to the idea of trust. Why do people do business with anybody? And it stems from this idea of trust. And especially in this new world of digital assets or crypto or Web3 or whatever you want to call it, one of the core values is changing the idea of who, what, where you trust when transacting in financials, in any financial means, or even just in any relationship. It's changing the way, and it brings a new way of doing that. And no matter what you're trusting, no matter if it's code or people or an intermediary, people need to have that trust in order to get onto those platforms.
And Mark, you bring up another really good point, another distinction aside from the one we just made with these offshore kind of lack of control entities like FTX, Mt. Gox. The differentiation, and because we see this in the media reports as well, is like this is not an indictment of crypto itself and the underlying technology of blockchain. Sometimes that gets lumped in with this, like, oh, clearly it doesn't work. When all that was happening was lack of controls and people just that didn't have the financial understanding of getting all levered up and then blowing themselves up again and taking client funds and lending it back and forth to their, Alameda and their other trading partners. It's like there was no controls there. That is has nothing to do with the underlying blockchain technology itself. And that's another important distinction to make, because when we read these media reports, sometimes it does get caught up in that. Like, well, Ethereum and Bitcoin and all these other things, are going to kind of get picked on, and they really have nothing to do with this.
Exactly. And this will be, as you said, an indictment, and people will say things like, this is why you can't trust Bitcoin or these new systems or anything, when it has nothing to do with that. And I think another good point to highlight is this was intent fraud. From what has been coming out with the affidavit from the new CEO who handled Enron, we are learning more and more. And one of the learnings is there was programmatic software built into the systems intently to subvert and fraud. And the idea was that there were young people at the helm who didn't see an issue with this. There was no wisdom in the room. And fraud is fraud. So to have an indictment on an industry that is actually supposed to protect from these types of things is a little misplaced. And that's why we're starting off this episode that way. And now I'd like to go into deeper things about trust. Where does trust come from? The concept of trust. And Matt, you and I were talking about, in society today, we have an immense trust in everything we do. Every single person in this world, not just in financial services. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the other systems and other facets of life to where we've put trust in centralized entities?
Yeah, so clearly one of the main areas that we trust still to this day is the banking system and our current financial system. And I like to say it's done a lot of good for sure for wealth creation and distribution and for people to move things back and forth. And we place an immense amount of trust in those systems and the financial side. And then we also trust, we're talking like how many photos do I have backed up to Apple's iCloud or Google stuff? How many documents are in Google Drive and things like that. We place a tremendous amount of trust in other centralized entities. When I send a text or an email, I just trust it's going to show up to you, Mark, right? I don't really fully understand how that gets there, but so we trust all of these centralized entities to handle our technology. And obviously technology is permeated into every single industry and everything we do, from healthcare records to communications to finance. And so when we think about how to respond and when that trust gets damaged, like that's why we're here having this conversation today, because it's a gut punch, right? It's definitely a gut punch when these trusted institutions that you have invested time and energy and effort, and you're trusting them to store things for you, and then something like this happens. It's a gut punch.
Well, so talk to us a little bit, because for me personally, and just I'm very aware of who I am and what experience and wisdom I have and where my gaps are. And even though I say that, I probably even have more that I'm not aware of. So one that I am aware of is, as much as I can say I've been in the business for coming up on 10 years and been through a lot, and I've sat in front of clients, I've sat in front of people who have shared their dreams, their fears about money and living life. And you can't replace that wisdom. And that's why I have a tremendous amount of respect for the advisor profession. And I think it's something that gets lost, that it takes an extreme amount of responsibility to take on to take that on. And every advisor who does it the right way understands that. What I think would be beneficial is, I would like to hear a little bit about this pivotal moment that in your career that I wasn't able to experience, because when it happened, I was more in my tennis life. So it didn't really hit me the way, and I only learned about it after. So can you tell us about this pivotal moment for you?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the pivotal moment was in my professional life was, and honestly, it impacted my personal life, was in 2000, the 2008-2009 financial crisis. I was at Arbor, and literally stocks are plummeting. Everything is, the trust had been completely destroyed, right? There is what happened was, these entities, large trusted institutions, we're talking the big names on Wall Street that are still around today, took on way too much risk and over levered themselves up to mortgages and subprime and We don't need to get into that, but the result of it was they had to get bailed out. They took on tremendous amount of risks and were almost to the point where they were going to take down the entire U.S. economy because they were collapsing to zero. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, like, these are institutions that have just completely taken the trust that they've been given earned over the last, whatever, 50 years, 100 years, and just thrown it away because they were taking too much risk, chasing returns, and doing stupid stuff. I was going to say a bad word, and it just frustrated us to no end, because I'm in this industry trying to help people, and I had clients calling me, is my money safe? I don't know. I'm worried. My pensions, my 401ks, my life savings is at jeopardy because these jackasses took all of this risk and were blowing themselves up. That was one part of it. The second part of it was then what the government's response was to bail them out because they were concerned for the end client and the taxpayers and everything else. The problem was there were no consequences for the people that took these risks. Nobody went to jail. They kind of circled the wagons around Lehman and threw them under the bus when, in fact, all of them should have gone under.
Couple smaller banks.
Yeah, a couple smaller banks. And it was a joke, in my opinion. And the trust was completely gone. My trust and faith in the government and how they responded, as well as the financial institution. I still, to this day, am grateful, and I'm going to give kudos to a company here, is Charles Schwab, one of my first employers in this industry. They didn't have to take any bailout money from the banks or from the federal government because they weren't taking these crazy risks. But every Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan, everybody, you go down the list. Go look at, if you're interested, go look at Troubled Asset Relief Program, the TARP, and you'll see the names to this day of all these entities that took this money. So Mark, bringing it back to trust, viscerally, I remember thinking, like, I don't even know who and what to trust. I felt pretty good about my job, but my clients were just didn't know what to do, right? They were calling me looking for answers, and I'm trying to do the best I can with the resources that I had, but you just felt kind of totally out of control just from people taking all this crazy risk. And one of the things I said earlier, that they were privatizing the profits and then socializing the losses, as well as all the emotional and reputational damage that spread throughout the country and the world. So that's, and I will get into it, but interestingly enough, so all of this, my head was, I'm questioning everything. And that's when the Bitcoin white paper got launched in 2008, right at the depths of all this. So I was open to thinking of new ways of building financial infrastructure that doesn't rely on people taking excessive risk, which is why it's so frustrating that we just saw the same thing happen with FTX.
So let's do that. Let's bring that back to today and kind of how this triggered almost this pivotal moment for you, because I think it bears a lot of parallels to what we're experiencing with FTX. What isn't going to happen is there's no bailout coming, right?
No.
There's no regulation. This entity, and I think you used a very important word when you talked about trust too, that our financial institutions had prior to the '08 crisis, which was they earned the trust. And that's an important thing. Trust is earned, it is not given. And these institutions who have earned trust it's then another tall task to keep that trust and maintain that trust. And so when we talk about what happens with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and this big institution that had gained, and I'm going to say they earned trust across different hedge funds, trading partners, in a lot of different areas, regulatory trust that they had gained, all that is destroyed now. All of it. And I think that is a reality that everyone has to come to. And I think everyone is grappling with is there is a trust both in centralized entities and then also in crypto digital assets or public trustless blockchains. There's trust is shaken. But what isn't going to happen is a bailout. There's no savior. No one's coming. And I think where we will, and I think this is where this will shine, is that people will be held accountable. There are actors that aren't going home and getting golden handcuffs from this.
Right. And that's a key differentiator of what's probably going to happen now versus what happened in 2008, 2009. There will, and there should have been consequences back then because we're still paying the price. But with Sam Bankman-Fried and his team and what we know over the last few days that's come out, granted this is not a court, right? But it looks pretty bad, right? When people they have no internal controls, they're approving Spence reports with Bitmojis and emojis. It's like, what is going on with, and Mark, this can segue into a little bit about what we were going to talk about. Like, there weren't fiduciaries. They didn't really care about their clients' funds at the end of the day. They were lending them out. They were playing fast and loose with it, lending money to themselves, a $1 billion loan to Sam Bankman-Fried on the backs of his own clients' money. Like, that is criminal. And whether or not the jurisdictions can work together to bring him to justice remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful. But he has powerful friends. We're not going to get into that, but in terms of what he's been doing for the last year, but we hope there's accountability for sure.
Absolutely. And some of the things that we're seeing, I mean, it's hard not to try when you put yourself in the position that he is in, or that you can see, and no one can really understand what's going on with him or who he is, but you have to feel some sort of, there's just a level, and I think NLW or Nathaniel Whitmore who does the Breakdown podcast, he says this really well. You have to have an extreme amount of hubris to even think of doing some of the things that you're doing in terms of what you're communicating, how you're acting. So again, I hope this is only going to put him further deeper into what is inevitable in our eyes, which is good. So
just real quick to that point, right? That would go away towards repairing some of the trust. If there can be consequences for actions for taking these types of risks and abusing client funds, because there wasn't any, in my opinion, there weren't any consequences in 2009. The public bore the brunt of it. and there were no consequences for the risk takers and the bad actors. There
Yep.
needs to be in this case.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit now. Let's segue into kind of Gemini, Coinbase. You mentioned a couple of these names and kind of the difference then there with, are they, because I think a lot of people, and again, we started off this episode with separating the two. So let's use this to still talk about how this is a little different. So you mentioned the word fiduciaries. And I think one thing that we can highlight here is the work that Gemini and others like them have done. And we will mention Gemini, full disclosure, we utilize Gemini as our qualified custodian, and they have a platform called Gemini Bitria, which is the platform at which we can use to manage portfolios and our investment strategies at Arbor Digital on the behalf of our advisor clients, as well as on the behalf of our retail investors that are underneath Arbor Capital Management. So we wanted to make sure we put that out there. But at the end of the day, they're a private company and they are regulated by a state entity called the New York Division of Financial Services. So with that, they have to go through a tremendous amount of work to get that qualification. So Matt, you are the compliance officer. You did a lot of that work, and I think it was upwards of a year of due diligence and compliance work on them specifically to before we enacted anything that we could do here at Arbor Digital. So can you talk a little bit about then how Gemini is different, or anyone else who has done similar processes?
Yeah, so I'll start probably back in 2015 before Arbor Digital was even a concept. And the reason that's important is because as myself as a financial advisor and as a fiduciary, I had been paying attention to this asset class. I'd watched the launch of Coinbase and I'd watched the launch of Gemini and watched how they went through the painstaking process of getting regulated, of actually working symbiotically with the regulatory institutions in New York and California to move this asset class forward in the right direction, hand in hand with regulators, which is really important in the United States, not going offshore, not going to these other places. And it took them a long time. And so I was watching that from a distance. And then when we decided to look for, if you've listened to some of the other episodes, you've heard this before, like I'm not going to rehash it here, but we were looking for a solution for our clients to be able to offer Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other assets for them in a regulated environment through a qualified custodian within the United States. And at the time, there were literally only two options, Coinbase and Gemini. And there was only one of them that was, at the time, was willing to work with advisors. That was Gemini. And then to your point, Mark, it took us almost a year. We had conversations with their compliance department, their exchange, their custodial team, looking at their SOC 1 and 2 reports.
And when you and real quick, when you say you and we, I know there was a lot of legal work done and partners that you all did as well on that work, right?
Yeah, we had our attorney and we had calls with their legal and compliance teams, just going through, because what was different for Gemini was, yes, they're a regulated entity under NYDFS and they have a state chartered trust company, but they hadn't gone fully into the RIA space. And we have our own requirements, just simple things like sending out statements and providing access and doing all these things that RIAs need. And so we were working with them to kind of build some of these features out. So then we can say, step onto the platform and say, okay, now we are comfortable with the work that's been done from Gemini and from our team to make sure that this is a safe place for our clients' assets. And so, yeah, that was a long process, a lot of late nights, a lot of, some hair pulling, but no, it was fine. All these gray hairs here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important because it's not sexy. It's not the thing everyone wants to talk about. And again, it's just been interesting. And even me coming into this space, what everyone is engaging with me to talk about first. We did all this work and we did all this. And, the first thing that, media wants to talk about is NFTs. What does it mean for advisors? Or what do digital assets mean? Like, no one wants to talk about risk management. No one wants to talk about due diligence. I'm like, oh, interesting. Because that's where, especially when I came on and, when we were going to go out and offer this to advisors, those were the two main places you have to start from. If you're going to offer this, it's just table stakes. It's, and that's where, again, we can take the good things about what has been set up in the traditional world and traditional finance, and we can bring that into this new world of digital assets. We can bring good things like fiduciary responsibility, client best interests, due diligence, risk management. Those things you start with, and they're not an afterthought. And that's a huge difference, I think, especially when we think of Gemini and we think of these other players in the spaces. And there are a lot of good actors in the space. And we tend to focus on Gemini, Coinbase, and these other places because those are the places that are regulated in the US. And there's so many others that are outside of US that are doing good things. I don't want to miss that. So I appreciate you going into the little bit of a deeper work and kind of what had to happen before. But I think now you're starting to see these conversations. Oh, risk management. I think there was a lot of assumptions. There was a lot of willful blindness from a lot of different people in the space in terms of working with certain actors. And everyone would ask us, why don't you work with this person? Why don't you work with that person? Very simple, because when you do the work and you go through a risk management and a compliance first lens, like we have to, you don't go do those things. There are these red flags. There are those red flags. Now, does that mean we're going to be perfect and we're going to get everything right? Not even close. Not even close.
Mark, you brought up a good point there. You said the work has to be done. It's not sexy. It's not full of hype. We're not, there's no ads that are, being run on national TV. We're sitting here head down. Let's do the work. Let's make sure that this is right for our clients and spend the time and energy and effort before we onboard $1 of theirs. And that's important. And I think what you've seen with this FTX, like big names, big money, we're just chasing this. And it's without doing their due diligence and homework clearly. And that to me is alarming. I mean, we're talking, I'm not going to name names, but yeah, $billion reputable institutions. Oh, well, we saw their ad and he was on the cover of Time. Well, clearly they've been vetted. No, you have to do the homework yourself. And it's not fun. It's not sexy. And you just have to roll up your sleeves and get dirty and ask all of the hard questions. And that wasn't getting done.
Absolutely. So I'd like to now let's use this as a segue into the next section of this episode, which is talk about, where do we go from here? And what's the number one thing we've come to the conclusion of is we have to repair the trust. And I think there's a couple of things floating out there where, okay, it's all about self-custody. Everyone should self-custody. And I'm going to be the first person to push back on that, because just like how in the traditional world and how people manage their traditional finances, there is benefit to working with centralized entities, good ones, and ones with noble intent that can help, because not everyone, and I would say the majority of people, are not equipped to self-custody. And what do I mean by that? Yes, everyone knows how to get on an internet browser and establish a wallet. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is there is security infrastructure. There are risk management measures aside from the security, meaning how do you secure your email? How do you secure your computer, your network? So that way, because when in this space, especially right now, it is a target. And if you go and ask a general person how to use a VPN, one is the answer is what's a VPN? And two is no, I don't know how to use a VPN. That tells you right there that there's still a majority of people who will interface with a centralized entity to engage in this asset class. And that is a simple truth, that self-custody is not the only answer. And it's because of those things. Not everyone is equipped from a security standpoint to protect themselves, to be able to safely store their assets and their wealth. I don't know, Matt, if you had any thoughts there. And it's kind of, it almost like makes me think this is why our value is so important. And it only solidifies that for us.
Well, Mark, it's again, bringing it back to trust. And I've thought a lot about this over the years. Like, do I trust if I lose my password to my bank or credit union, right, I can reset it, right? And I'm going to trust that they're going to send an email and all that good stuff, and I can recover it and get in. When you talk about self-custody, do you trust yourself and your knowledge of the security infrastructure to hold your own private keys and to hold the keys to the kingdom if you're going to do it that way? Because if you lose them, there's nobody to call to reset your password. And that's another risk that I get. They're not your keys, not your crypto. Fully appreciate and understand that argument, but I would say 90% of the world is not ready for that based on the current tech, and probably 95%. They don't have the deep enough understanding of the critical infrastructure of technology. You're talking about VPNs and creating, we don't need to get into it here, but yeah, it's not, the user experience there isn't appropriate yet for most people.
Absolutely. And this even just comes, this isn't me saying this as just as a belief. It stems from experiences that I've gone through since day one of me just even telling people I am learning about the space. This is even before I was employed by somebody in this space. Many people have gone into DeFi and through wallets and tried yield farming, and I've seen so many stories about people getting hacked or giving away their private keys to people who they thought were from the network, who were trying to help them because a transaction didn't go through, or the transaction didn't go through the way they thought it was going through, and they didn't know how to read the thing that they signed within the wallet. And
right.
That happens all the time, and it happens still right now. And so there is a lot of value to be added through people. And I think the other thing for us too, in terms of rebuilding and repairing trust, is this is where, as fiduciaries, we have to ask deeper questions than just the simple things of where do you buy, sell, and trade? Like, how do you invest? We have to ask the questions of where are you buy, selling, and trading? Why are you buy, selling, and trading? What's the reason for it? What's the purpose? What are you trying to do? And again, we mentioned this word chasing, is we've seen a lot of people chase, and a lot of people are losing money, and they're destroying their wealth at the expense, or they're destroying their wealth, and it's at the expense of their futures. And so we as fiduciaries, we see that, and regulators aren't coming in to protect them. That's who we're supposed to protect, right? So we see our responsibility in this space is to go out there and ask the questions and make sure. And I mean, we have advisors calling us from the bigger names, and I won't name their names, but trusted advisors, 20 years in the business, calling us, asking us for resources because clients are coming to them making poor decisions and then not knowing what to do with it. And that's a failure. And so that's how we can repair this trust. That's in one way.
And I think, Mark, yeah, one of the benefits that we have being advisors and the people that we work with, like a lot of our clients or other advisory firms, like we know how to frame this in the context of client portfolios, right? A 1% to 2% allocation, right? If you're willing to take a little bit more risk, maybe you go a little bit higher than that, but you don't even answer that question until you know the client, until you know, and then you can help walk with them to come to a solution, instead of people like throwing their life savings after something, after watching a YouTube video, or their brother-in-law told them to get in onto this hot crypto ICO or whatever, and then it blows up. And because at the end of the day, it comes back down to investing and making sure that we're doing the right things for the clients. And Mark, you were talking about this before we even got on here. It's about serving people, right? It's about serving them in the right way. And that at the end of the day is what this is about. And that's where we can help start repair the trust. Not that we caused the damage, but we're going to help repair it, because we can say to people, look, we were allocating 1% to this. Now it's 0.5% or whatever. It's even less of your portfolio. Now, if we want to come back into it, we can, and here's how we can do that, and we can rebalance. But we're not going to go crazy and blow up your portfolio and your life savings by investing in these assets. And again, that's also part of, I think, and I'll say it, I think there's been a failing from some of the regulators in the US because this is happening on YouTube and in places, and people are giving advice that's not financial advice. If you have to listen to that, and if somebody has to put the disclaimer, not financial advice, and then they're going to tell you to go buy things, don't listen to them at all, because it's terrible, and it's happening right now. And
Absolutely.
this FTX thing and all this stuff, and they're running ads during the Super Bowl. It's like, who are they targeting? Right? They're investors and people that the regulators in the US are trying to protect.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely. And again, we can go on a long run, but I think one of my biggest pet peeves in this space is the influencers who aren't fiduciaries, who aren't advisors, are able to skirt things by simply putting one line that says NFA DYOR, not financial advice. Do your own research.
That's a massive red flag. If you see that, yeah, don't even listen to them.
And I think, and if you're one of those influencers who does talk a lot about these assets and say things like that, I think you need to take a hard look at yourself in the mirror, and see, what am I putting out there? Because a lot of people were promoting FTX and still promote other things, that you can't, and again, and that's where we are the ones that are best positioned to help repair this trust. And I hope
advisors,
we are, advisors.
Yeah,
yes. Advisors, wealth managers. So, I mean, this is also a call out to everyone else in this space, and everyone else can say we're competitors and that we're competing for the same. I don't care about any of that right now, especially right now. Everyone building in this space, in the wealth advisory space, financial advice space, indexing, digital asset research, FTSE Russell, Eaglebrook, On-Ramp, Height Zero, everybody who is building something, who's trying to help bring this in a safe and secure way, in a disciplined, responsible way to people's lives, keep doing it. This is the sad thing I see. I've seen a lot of people who came into this space excited about it because they saw the revolutionary technology and the things that could possibly be changed. And now they're defeated and they're going to leave. And they've said, I can't take this anymore. And you know what? I can't fault them for it. But for us, we now know we are more needed than ever in this space to help.
And Mark, and we're committed to it, right? We're here to help rebuild the trust, and we're not going anywhere. And I think what that communicates is we are committed to the asset class. We are still believe in the underlying technology, not the failures of centralized institutions, especially these offshore ones. There's always going to be failures like that. We haven't talked about it. Elizabeth Holmes getting sentenced on Friday, right? Theranos, right? She was a fraud in the healthcare sector. So in a regulated environment, so it can and will continue to happen. But we are committed to building this asset class and building the connections between traditional and finance and decentralized finance, and giving people access to digital assets in a responsible and prudent way.
Well said. And so I guess to end off this episode, the trust episode, if you or anyone you need, or anyone you're close to, colleagues, friends, families, networks, you name it, if you need a trusted partner to help make sense of what is going on, whether or not you invest, please reach out to us. We are going to put some links to set up a meeting with us. We are open to talking. We've had a lot of conversations over the last 2 weeks, but we are here for it. This is why we're here, and we aren't going to shy away. And I know there's a lot of other people doing the same thing. All of the names that we mentioned before, they're doing the same thing. And big shout out to them. Huge shout out. We respect you. We are happy that we're all trying to do what's right in this space, and we still need you. So please don't leave. Matt, anything else you'd want to end off with based on trust?
No, Mark, I think, we made our points on this, and, it has helped in my mind clarify, right, that advisors and people that are fiduciaries, people that have that obligation to their clients, are the ones that need to be doing this, not that are in the United States. It's so important. So, and last thing I want to say is thanks to the rest of our team, Kirby, Michelle, and Heather, Susan. Like, you guys are supporting Marc and I, and supporting the team in general. So as we get into Thanksgiving week, I want to say thanks to everybody at Arbor.
What a great way. And that's exactly what I was going to end with our episode. This is going to be an episode that launches just before Thanksgiving. We are recording on Saturday, November 19th. So I think the best way to end is to be grateful. And so we are extremely grateful for our team. We're extremely grateful for everyone at Arbor Capital Management. We have even team members there who help us think about this space in a different way and bring different perspectives. So that way we're not operating in our own echo chambers all the time. And we are so grateful for you. We're grateful for our clients. One thing I wanted to shout out is, if you are one of our clients and you're listening right now, thank you so much for the trust that you put in us. And we're thankful to have you go along this journey with us. And we're thankful to everyone else building in the space. We're thankful to everyone who is doing things in a responsible way. And a big shout out to Illuminated Advisors, shameless plug for them. They are the ones that help put out these emergency episodes quickly. They are the ones who help us edit these episodes. And so we have to give a big shout out to them, as they also bring their own perspective to what we market and what we say. And they help keep us grounded and accountable. So that way we don't go off the rails as much as we sometimes end up doing. So we just want to be grateful. So if you are listening to this, be sure to sit down and think about, and that's a good way, because right now we're all human beings. We're all going through just even the traditional world too, the traditional markets, everyone's suffering a little bit. And it's important to be grateful for what you have and what you're able to do. And we are extremely privileged to be where we are today. So be sure to do that. And then at the end of the day, be sure to tell somebody that you care about and love them. Matt, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for the episode. We hope everyone enjoyed this edition of the Asset Revolution podcast, the trust episode. Happy Thanksgiving, or happy celebration of whatever it is you celebrate over the coming holidays. We support you, and be sure to reach out to us, and we will see you next time on the Asset Revolution podcast. We're going to make it. We appreciate you listening to this edition of the Asset Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Marc Nichols. Please don't forget to let us know how you like the show by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen. For more downloadable digital asset resources and educational opportunities, please visit us at arbordigital.io. We are here to help you get off zero safely and securely. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to tell someone you care about them. Cheers.
Financial advisor, unless you're under contract with or actively speaking with Arbor Capital Management or Arbor Digital, a division of Arbor Capital Management. This podcast is just that, a podcast. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice. If you have individual questions, please reach out.